Thanks so much for joining us today for another installment of Sharegiving. I'm Rob Stoller, your host, along with my brother David, who's been caring for his wife Barbara since she was diagnosed over a decade ago with early onset Alzheimer's. We're so pleased to present our guest today, Peter Gilbert, the founding partner at High Point Law Offices in Bucks County, specializing in elder care, long-term care, and estate planning. What makes Peter even more unique is that he spent 17 years in pastoral ministry, having received his degree from Yale University Divinity School, and he's got experience caring for his parents who both suffered dementia. So Peter is right in the crosshairs of the Sharegiving platform, and we're so happy to have him with us today. Without further ado, let's meet Peter and get into it.
You've had a very eclectic education.
Yeah, I from Haverford to Yale Divinity School and then to Vermont for a pastorate, also a pastorate in Bucks County. But in the middle of that, I went to William & Mary Law School and then joined a firm in Doylestown around 1990 or so, was there about 8 years. But I came across another way of doing, another approach or philosophy of estate planning, put it that way, with a national group. And I said, yeah, I want to do it this way. And so I spun out on my own, and here I am.
So talk about that for a minute. Your approach to estate planning. How is it unique, and how did you come up with it?
Well, I think the thing worth noting in Peter's background, because I'm interested in that leap to doing it a different way, is your experience also with dementia in your family. And
yeah, my parents, right?
Your experience taking care of both of them, was it by yourself or did you have help?
Well, that was part of the whole learning curve. I'm an only child. We were living in the Bucks County Percy area at the time when my parents were failing. And so I wasn't next door. I knew some legal planning. I knew legally how to help them and getting on Medicaid, preserving some assets. But what was the gap was I didn't know, I didn't have any resources regarding caregiving or communication or making judgments. Should they still be at home? What is safe? And all that had to more or less learn on the job. And probably could have done a lot better, but it was a lot of stuff you've heard a million times, but it was something I wasn't prepared at all. I think couldn't imagine it, and it wasn't as widespread in conversations in those days. I think this is in the 90s, late 80s, and 90s, very much the 90s. And two very different ways it played out. My mother's situation was extremely gradual. My father was more rapid. And so very different scenarios as to how they progressed or regressed in the disease. And so I think in some things I knew how to do, other things there were gaps, like how could I know they were safe? When should certain measures be taken? And finding help. I did find a person from our church that did help, but didn't know the whole gamut of organizations maybe and so on that were out there. It was also the classic sandwich generation. Our kids were older, but we still had a lot going on with them, going into college and things. And then my parents, which is the classic scenario.
Yeah.
So had to learn a lot of things.
And you were practicing at the time in Doylestown?
I was practicing law at the time with a firm in Doylestown. That pretty much that whole time. And so I was able to help legally, but other things were more of a challenge, I think. But the things that, looking back, what could have made it better was, how to communicate, how to listen, how to communicate effectively, preserving, trying to, come there with a notepad and take notes. And a friend of mine, a lawyer, said, when someone dies, it's like a library burning down.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's one thing I should have spent more time on. Tell me who's in that picture. Or the story about your growing up. They grew up on opposite ends of the country, met during the war, and so on. I knew some of that, but not all of it. So preserving the stories, knowing how to communicate, how to evaluate safety,
Right.
What resources were out there. Part of it was just being very busy, and having to squeeze this in time. All of which I hear them all the time now from clients.
Right. Yeah. And I know exactly what you're saying too.
Yeah.
Were your parents, did they have difficulty speaking, each of them? Did it affect them in a phasic way where?
No.
Okay.
No,
So
I don't remember that ever really being. It was more, what they said,
right.
there's no aphasia. No.
Yeah. Well, you were lucky because that's the situation I have. Did this experience, so you were practicing law, then you left to form your own firm with maybe a different approach in mind. Was that informed significantly by the experience with your parents?
No, it wasn't. There are other considerations on how to do estate planning. I need not go into that now, but in a more comprehensive way. But no, I didn't see the connection. I should have, because it does relate a lot to. But now I see the connection more, that estate planning, if I can just give you a summary, is my way of looking at it, given to me by the shift in my career, is way more than a document. Getting a document, that is part of it, but really the only thing that matters is, do you know what to do? Does it work? And that's where we get into the non-document part of estate planning, which would include, people who are in my situation, the situation I was in, people who are now dealing with their own parents or spouse. They need our legal documents, but they need a lot more than that. And
yeah, it
some
struck
of that
me
we can deliver, and some we can't. Some we need to help them, guide them in the right direction.
when I read your book, both of them actually, and they're similar. One's for the afflicted and one's for the caregiver. But looking at the whole of it, you were actually providing a game plan to your client that was much more comprehensive than just a living will, et cetera.
I wish I'd had that book with my own parents.
Peter, I'm sort of fixated on your background in the ministry. And I'm curious as to, because we speak so often about empathy. And I think, on some level, every lawyer should probably have some ministerial training. But how did that background inform your legal practice and your care for your parents?
Great question. I think on the legal practice, we try to stress the counseling element in estate planning, which I think is a very important part of it, where we respect the client as being the expert on them, and we know the law, but also being able to guide the client and listen and not put them into a box right away. You're a client, not a case. So that's, it can be tempting both to do that, but that really is not the case. So I think that's one area where that was one of the factors in this other organization I joined. And I think that did connect with a ministerial background about, being a counselor as well as a guide, as well as a technician in the law, all of which I think need to be there. It's certainly in estate planning, because you're talking about family and money and relationships and future hopes and plans. I think that the way that my personal experience as a caregiver is just being able to be at home with and relate a little better to the clients who come in who are going through that same thing, either as a spouse or as a child, usually adult child. So I've been there. I think that helps me understand a little bit better what they're going through. I don't pretend to know everything they're going through, and to appreciate, I hear stories about what they're doing and the sacrifices they're making and the time they're spending and the effort they're putting in. I really appreciate that.
So Peter, when somebody comes in, a client, and we're interested specifically for this program where that client is a caregiver, or within that client group, caregiving is an important element. How do you help? Do you have a methodology when you're sitting down with somebody, particularly where that's part of the deal?
Well, yeah, I think, first of all, it's just the tone is I've been there. We have a law clerk. I think he'll be joining us next year as an attorney. He's been through it with grandparents. It turns out I didn't know that at first, but I think that's part of just setting the tone of the conversation. Specifically, though, what we can do professionally as attorneys is reduce the pressure in one area or two areas where the financial pressure is, or the fear of total financial loss can be eliminated. That takes, and we're trying to reduce the emotional burden they've got. They got enough already without having that also.
Right.
We also, share with them if we think there's particular resources, caregivers, care managers, information about local facilities. We've had some, it's actually a client's daughters who had a business, I'm not sure they still do, with just things you can use to communicate with them, or have a portable shower, all kinds of things like that.
Right.
Helping them understand nursing home versus assisted living versus in-home care, and that kind of thing. Is the house, should mom and dad, or should you, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, stay in the house? Is it safe? Right. What have you done to modify the house? In addition to trying to take that financial pressure, or taking that financial pressure off as much as possible, we're trying to also give them some other either resources, or just inquire a bit and talk about just the situation more generally.
Right. Can be so bewildering, even as I hear you describe it. When you're sitting down, it's like being hit with a wave.
It's everything at once. It's physical in a sense, because mom is really tired taking care of dad every day. She's exhausted. It's emotional because it's a slow death. It's financial. It's everything at once, right. Which is I just amazed. I see these people and they come in and they're dealing with it and coping it. I'm just in awe that they can do that and keep their dignity, and it's amazing. So it unfortunately once in a while takes a lid off the pot and reveals family issues that have always been, and that.
Right.
But more often than not, though, it shows their strength, and they're just, we'll deal with it, and they cope as best they can.
Well, I have to think, sitting in your office, letting go of everything that's happening in their lives, number one, you've got to be the best qualified individual for them to speak with. Again, mostly, I think your legal acumen, you may be, but you may not be the most brilliant lawyer in your field, but you're probably one of the few that has studied the human condition and was bred to be empathetic. And I think that is enormously important. And you talk about listening. again, I think listening was part of your training before you became a lawyer. And listening is an enormously important quality.
Well, yeah, who can they talk to about this? You know, do you think about that? Maybe they can't, maybe they have a difficulty even talking to the kids about it.
Yeah. I know by experience.
Okay. So that's part of it. Now, I do know a lot of smart people, and I hang out with them and I try to pick their brain, because I'm not the smartest lawyer in the world, but I know who they are, at least many of them, and I try to learn from them. But it is often one place, not the only place, where they can really kind of share what's going on. You know, the doctor's office, we're maybe usually in a hurry, unfortunately, the way the medical system imposes that on doctors. But so I'm not saying we're the only one, obviously, but I get the feeling that sometimes it's a unique opportunity for them to just say what's happening.
I think it is. And unfortunately, you're right. The doctor is usually the first touch, the family doctor, who is aware before anyone, before they even know they need your help. But they are so pressed for time. You're right. It's very difficult. So when you talk to them, again, looking at your writings, you're putting a team together for them, right?
Oh yeah, it's there's a lot involved, whether in the planning or a Medicaid application or wherever in that spectrum we are. That number one, you know, we use a personality assessment called the Kolbe, Kolbe, which is very helpful in putting a team together with different ways of handling things, which we need. So a lot of things I totally rely on paralegals and other team members, and we're just absolutely critical. It's not something I would be doing all by myself. It wouldn't work well that way. So the team is there, and you know, it's a matter of their learning and being trained, and they're also part of the whole sense of assurance that this thing is being taken care of. But it's, you know, it's a lot. A Medicaid application is a huge amount of paperwork.
Yeah, horrible.
When we get one of those. But
I mean, you're like a financial. You're being a financial advisor too.
In a sense, yeah. We have to have a total, in the sense of having to have a total picture of their finances, which is a big step. You know, often these are of a generation didn't talk about their money, and they were very private about it. And I respect that, but you know, Medicaid must know, and we must know, in order to make an informed decision and a proper strategy. But there's a huge amount of, it's a lot of work for them to gather all this information and to explain why that check was written or whatever it was. Just when they don't have time to do that. It's again, a lot of things coming together. You know, they're worried about dad, but now they've got to do all this paperwork. But it's worth it, but it is additional pressure on the family.
Huge. So, Peter, if we can do kind of a hypothetical, our listeners maybe they are many in the position you're describing, and maybe they've got some modest income, modest savings, and they've just been hit with this diagnosis. How would you enact the conversation?
Well, tell me about, let's say it's dad. Tell me about dad, and what's it like day by day? You know, how much effort does the family need to keep dad on the straight and narrow or keep him safe? We talk a lot about the house. Is the house safe? Can they live on one floor, or can they adapt the house to be able to live on one floor? Should they move? So you know, what is, and I'm talking there about safety mainly. Is it safe for dad to be at home? Most, you know, the general assumption is, if it's at all possible and wise, they should be at home as long as possible because of the familiarity of the surroundings.
Right.
But there's always safety issues there, and also just fatigue. If they can't afford to get round-the-clock helpers or even 8-hour-a-day helpers, then they'll have to look at something else. But we say, you know, is it possible? Is that what they want? Is it possible to stay home? And let's just check off the safety issues. And is there anybody else that can help, whether it's children, or neighbors or friends or church or paid agency or something like that they could afford. But that's where the financial comes in, what's their income and resources. So that's the first step, is just setting the stage for at least the near future.
Mm-hmm.
How do we handle the near future? And if things got worse, could we still stay at home if that's their preference? And maybe there's resources they could turn to. Unfortunately, the threshold, there is Medicaid at home, but the income level to qualify is so low that even our very modest clients have a little bit too much income to qualify. It's really, I think it would save the state a lot of money, but that's my rant. If there could be more Medicaid at home for people who just, need more help. But it's also just, if possible, and this depends on mom and dad, are the kids involved? Should they be in these meetings? And I say, the adult children. And sometimes it's all of them. I have one family, it's pretty much all the children, but usually even if it's all of them who are involved, some are more involved than others, I find, whether because of their time or their geographical nearness or whatever it is. And like to have those involved, number one, to know what we're doing for mom and dad, if there's legal steps we're taking, which usually we are, what it will do, the results it's designed to achieve, but also just inquiring, what's their game plan personally as far as being involved with this. Sometimes we end up preparing a contract where mom and dad pay daughter or pay son or both of them to take care, because they maybe have to give up their job.
Right.
Maybe a child moves in with mom and dad. There are certain legal Medicaid implications there. So just evaluating, helping them to see here, here are options. We do give them, if they looking for outside help, some resources with the care managers, especially recommend they use the services of a care manager to guide them on the caregiving and medical side, and agencies and so on. But I think that's one area we would like to even increase as being a resource of resources.
Right.
For those. Some attorneys have, they're called life planning law firms or something, where you have a social worker or a nurse on staff. I don't know if we're going that direction, but at least a functional equivalent of that, where people can get other resources besides what we can do for them.
Yeah, you see rehab facilities and hospitals and people especially dealing with elder care that have social workers as part of their group.
Right.
Peter, listening to you, and I've been through so much of this, one of the things that I think it's almost shameful that as presently configured with Medicaid and Medicare, you almost have to be stripped of resources before you can get that assistance. And I can understand that most families coming to you, this is the biggest thing on their mind, is how they can get through this financially, because they're looking at sort of into the mouth of a gun. They make too much money, even if it's modest, to be able to access any of these resources. And so then they have to figure out the best of sometimes lousy alternatives.
Yeah, it's the great middle class. The very wealthy can manage it. I'm not saying we dismiss them, but it's still an expense and a strain equally. The very poor, can qualify very easily, but it's the great middle class that has this conflict. So, still in Pennsylvania, there are a number of things we can do depending on the nature of the case. So usually we can improve the situation significantly. And again, our goal is at least take the most of the financial burden off. Now, the paradox is, I've just briefly alluded to this earlier, is, staying at home, Medicaid not going to help you much unless you have very, very low income. And that most people are kind of middle class and their income is too much in the Medicaid. So that's really I think these days, the biggest frustration, partly for me and for clients, they could be at home safely, at least for a long time, maybe not forever. But to have to hire, 4 or 5 days a week or so, they just can't manage that for a very long time. And yet that would be the ideal scenario. So I don't know, I leave that to the people in Harrisburg and Washington to figure out. But I think that's where the big problem is. I think as people may have to eventually rely on the nursing home, and even if that's not what they really want, they maybe could stay home, but it's just, they can't manage that.
Yeah, in my case, I looked at the facilities, and I have more means than many of the people we're talking about, and looked at the memory care facilities, et cetera, and reached the conclusion, which I think is still my conclusion, that my wife is better off being at home. That is familiar. But the burden is still great. And, I have somebody that works 5 days a week, and it's not inexpensive, but I can't understand, knowing that there's so many people, probably 80% of the family member caregivers are really without that kind of means. It's almost an impossible situation. As you say, it's a paradox. The best opportunity and situation would be to be at home, but you can't afford it.
Right. So it's a big problem, and I think we need to rethink that. I'm not part of those powers that be that do it, but whether on the medical side or the financial side, well, I've said enough. I think we've covered that, but that's where the real problem is, when you're not bad enough to have to be in a nursing home, but you still need a lot of care. And it's especially a problem where the children are far away, or there are no children. And then, as you know, the caregiver can often end up in worse shape than the one he or she is caring for, because they're just totally fatigued, or they sprain their back, or something happens like that and can't do all the lifting. Anyway, that is, I think, where the, beg your pardon?
Or they lose their socialization, they lose their connection,
right,
which is
they're totally cut off. Right.
Yeah.
And, it touches on something you also emphasized in your book, of helping others to help you.
Mm-hmm.
And building a network, especially in these situations where they haven't really cultivated that kind of network, and they're not used to asking for help. They're not comfortable with it.
No.
Is this part of your coaching when you're with them, to help them to think about who might be able to help them that they know, family and friends?
Well, I think what specifically we've done, what I've touched on, I think, are number one, having the children, maybe even paying the children, which is not really paying. The children just put the money aside in the bank and don't really spend it. So it's really an advance on the inheritance. But that's a situation, maybe that child needs to quit their job or only work part-time. And that's where maybe the parents be okay paying the child at least something. They feel their dignity is upheld, and they don't feel as guilty with the child, leaving work and coming with them. I've had a few situations where the children took in mom and dad. Not very often. It's a bigger risk for the children, because it may be only 6 months and then they've got to go to a nursing home. But I have seen a few cases, and it's worked out well so far anyway, until the parent gets worse. But it's not the most common option.
Right.
More commonly, I've seen sometimes an adult child come to live with mom and dad, be a caregiver for a time. I've seen that more than I see the parents actually moving. But that's why we like to get the family involved and see what the options are is our family available at all? I've seen it where there's more than one child, and they sort of take turns, so they're not all wiped out with all giving that care. 2 or 3 children may take turns in helping out with mom and dad, and that, in a way, could be almost one of the better scenarios if there's that many children,
right?
Or at least 2 of them who could trade off and not one of them be totally overwhelmed with that. So that would be helpful. And, other organizations, churches, I think there's a lot of need out there.
Huge. And people that want to help, but
right.
They really need to be, helped in becoming helpers. You have to reach out to them. This caregiver contract, I'm fascinated. I read about it, and I mean, I've looked at it. Is this, I suppose something like that becomes part of the financial plan as well?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's a twofold, usually perhaps a twofold purpose. It is a way of reducing mom and dad's assets in a slow way for Medicaid purposes, but it's also mom and dad may feel better sometimes if they're paying the daughter, paying the son. Right. And the child, to the best of my knowledge, they're not spending it. They're just putting it in the savings account, So I think mom and dad may feel better about it doing it that way, both because of they're increasing their chance of getting Medicaid if they ever need that. And secondly, and Medicaid does not allows it as long as it's a fair wage. So it's a way of reducing your assets in order to qualify, but it also helps that dignity end on both sides. Maybe that child gave up their job or is away from home. And so I think it can be actually a very positive thing. But Medicaid requires an actual contract, which makes sense.
But I also think for the caregiver, it's a way of making them feel better about what they're doing. It almost attaches some professionalism to their job.
Yeah.
This is a job.
I think it does, and it respects what they're doing, and their family finances are not so out of whack if they had to, leave their job or only work part-time. So I think it helps all around where there are children who are, willing and able to do that.
I'm curious, and again, for our listeners, I would assume that the best time to come see someone like yourself would be immediately after the diagnosis. But I also assume that a lot of people wait until it becomes a more serious issue because the disease has this long arc. What would your advice be?
The best time is when the sun is shining and all is well, the sky is blue, the birds are singing, and you're just fine. But to either take legal or financial steps, whether it's long-term care insurance, which is much better than it used to be, or some kind of legal plan, which there are some, which could, preserve at least certain assets from being lost to the nursing home, not everything. Long before there's any hint of any illness at all. That would be the ideal, because then it's a 5-year wait, as you know, before all that, the legal side, before the legal steps can take effect. So that would be, in one sense, the ideal. Secondly, as soon as there's a diagnosis, yes, come see, start not just a lawyer, but maybe looking at caregiving and care groups and so on, and support groups and all that, including taking legal steps as soon as possible, and we can see what can be done. We can still help them financially. Even when Dad just went to the nursing home yesterday, we can still help, but then we're really pressing, we're hurrying. It's a lot of work in the worst possible time. It's much easier and cheaper, I might say, to plan ahead as much as they can. But we don't. The trouble is we don't know. We don't know if it's hereditary. We don't know. It's not something you catch, apparently. So there are people who may, So it's some people will take action, and some are, well, let's wait and see.
Yeah, I think it's a great point for our listeners, because we tend to think, for so many don't even have a will, let alone, the kind of protections you're talking about. And, but what you're really saying is everybody should, even in the most incipient moment, come and talk about a living will, and if something happened to them, who is going to make decisions about their health and have a proxy and all of these things well before, they need it. And it's also a lot cheaper then.
Yeah, it is. And really in this area, I mean, estate planning, we think, is who gets my stuff when I'm dead, which is not a very exciting topic, frankly. I think the most important estate planning document in that regard is your power of attorney.
Yeah.
And does it allow your children to do the things that they may need to do if there's this kind of illness? And is it relatively, it can't be too old. The banks don't like it if it's too old. So I think that, in more than anything else, is number one. Do you have an up-to-date power of attorney that says what it needs to say? And do they know who's been chosen as power of attorney? Are they ready for that job? That is number one.
Yeah.
Number two, estate planning. There's estate planning methods that can be used to shelter assets legally, at least some of the assets legally. And then I said long-term care insurance has come a long way, where if you never need it, it goes as life insurance too. So there are things people can do, or some people they'll sign up for, Anne's Choice or Pine Run or Christ Home or a place like that, and go in fine, independent, and that's a game plan too.
That's a game plan. It's an expensive game plan.
I'm sorry, that game plan is to go into an assisted living home before you really require it.
Well, it's called a CCRC, and then it's assisted living, but it's also independent living. You're totally on your own in your cottage or your apartment, and you may never need. But if you do need assisted living, it's next door. It's on the same facility. If you need nursing care, it's in the same. So it's the whole spectrum is there. And so you don't have to worry about it. The choices are made for you, and the care is there, and they'll take care of you. And the contracts vary, but we have many, many of those facilities around here because Pennsylvania has a very large number of seniors. So that is an option besides the legal option of protecting assets or getting insurance, whatever. Is probably the three major options for people would be those. They're going to an Anne's Choice, a Pine Run, and the many, many others there are, Elm Terrace Gardens in Lansdale. One of those places that has all the levels. Some people love it and some people don't like it, but they're full. Right. And the legal planning that can be done ahead of time, starting with the power of attorney and maybe a trust, maybe a different kind of will, who knows? And then maybe looking at financial planning if they're young enough and healthy enough to do that. So there are ways of dealing with this, and even at the last minute, but we're talking planning ahead is always the best.
Yeah.
And the good thing is really none of these decisions, all three of these, you're not really compromising your future. You're not really changing dramatically your retirement years in any one of these ways, either by the insurance or the legal way or the CCRC, like Anne's Choice or Christ Home or those. You're not really compromising much of anything. You're giving up something, you're modifying some things financially, that's true. But basically your life goes on as you wish. So, but you have something in place that will, in one way or another, handle that situation, either financially or legally or just in terms of guaranteed care.
Right, and it's not, you see, we typically think dealing with our aging parents, it can be a spouse, just as in my case, and which is the last thing you would expect or imagine.
And I would think that's the most difficult. I've known other people gone through that, and I think that's the most difficult. But anyway, yes, you don't know who it might be because we've had a few people that had I think the founder of the Dementia Society of America in Doylestown, his wife was in her 50s, I think, when she had Alzheimer's. So
and eventually passed.
Your wife was too.
Yeah. My wife was 54 when
That's what I thought. Yeah.
She got it and was diagnosed at 58. I think the real challenge there, and what you're talking about is also all about communication. When do you really deal with this and,
Right.
and find that group that can help you, whether it's the doctor who needs to know this, whether it's your lawyer. In our case, we do have a good trust and estates. Ironically, Barbara was an excellent trust and estates lawyer.
Good for her.
And had dealt with this professionally. But I think one of the great difficulties is the children, even the adult children, because they are all at points in their lives when, they're expecting to have this all of a sudden fabulous or new or adult relationship with their mother or father, right. and the table turns totally.
That's very true. Yeah. As like I said, with my parents, I think there were stories that were lost, and the older you get, the more you appreciate your parents and want to know more of the history, and then that was going dark. So it is a real loss.
Do you see your practice continuing to expand? I mean, the universe of people they're getting older. Across America, this is the graying of America, where the average age
boomers, yeah,
keeps increasing. What are the implications of that for you?
Well, we have another lawyer coming on, and maybe one more in the future after that. But honestly, I wish they found a cure tomorrow. I mean, yeah. Yes, it keeps us busy as a law firm. But there's plenty of things we could do in estate planning. So I want to make that's real clear. I've been through it with my parents. I would not want that to happen to anybody. So first thing first. But yeah, we're there to serve and to alert people, educate people to, we plan ahead financially, and we try to take good care of ourselves medically and our health and weight and all that.
Right.
This to me is just one more element of just saying if it doesn't happen, okay, life goes on. But if it does happen, the other thing, of course, we're concerned about is because of COVID, the federal government has spent a lot of money, and maybe rightly so, in getting us out of that. But the government has a big debt that needs to pay off, and that means taxes. And we don't know, and I have no inside knowledge of anything about to happen, so I'm disclaiming that. But it seems to me, I've seen one change in the Medicaid rule where it was 3 years look back. Now it's 5 years. I can't imagine that's not going to change. It's such a huge, that's one of the biggest items in the federal budget is us boomers.
Right.
So I understand that. So
I
don't know.
Could you speak a little more about that, Peter? Could you explain that?
Well, I don't know the exact numbers, but the Medicare and Medicaid part of the federal budget is, and the state budgets too, is I don't know what percentage it is, but it's a large percentage of the overall budget, and that's mainly because of this baby boom generation moving through the generations. So, and that's not about it hasn't started declining yet. It will eventually, but still growing. And that on top of everything else that the government has to pay for, they've got to keep control of that. And I don't know, have no advance or inside knowledge, but they did make it a little bit tighter a few years ago when they went from a 3-year look back on Medicaid to a 5-year look back. I would not be surprised if it's extended or if they make other changes. They could be great. They could open up, Medicaid for home care, and it might save them money for all I know.
Right.
So I think there will be changes. The changes could make it more difficult.
I mean, the look back for our listeners,
right?
You can't. They worry about transferring assets, so you have to be able to, demonstrate that in the 5 years. You haven't transferred out of your estate assets.
Exactly. But the government may say, no, you should spend at least this percentage of your assets, partly. And it's a great contrast. And Medicare is a great job. We tell a story of a man who had a heart surgery in Hershey. It cost $750,000, but Medicare covered it. And it was a good thing. He was patched up, made better, had many more years of a good retirement. But it's a different approach in the long-term care area. So until there's a medical solution, I don't know. I'm sure probably people who know a lot more than I do about what Washington is thinking about as how it deals with this ever-expanding part of its budget. We do know if people do planning under the current law, they're grandfathered. That's always been the case. I would assume that would happen again.
Right.
But I just can't imagine it won't change somehow, because it's just a huge, huge problem financially for the governments as well.
Combined with Social Security.
Social Security too, of course.
Yeah. Which is all related to a greater and greater aging population.
Right. Yeah.
Peter, this is a little bit of an awkward question, but you both your parents suffered dementia. I'm sure it's crossed your mind that you may be susceptible in some way. Are you taking your own advice? And
yeah, we've made some legal steps for that in our own case. Yes. Yeah, we have. And we have other things we're going to be doing also. So as we learn, maybe some newer things that can be done. So yes. So I'm looking to my sons.
As I have with my daughter.
We have put some things in place. We have some more we're going to be putting in place for ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of your own case in point. I'm sure you see a lot of people who are in the position you're in.
Right, we do.
And with David's kids, I know they've researched the genetic diagrams going on, and
oh yeah, no, I had them all tested. 23andMe, just to relieve some of their anxiety of, are they more predisposed than the general public? And, the answer was somewhat reassuring to them, modestly, if anything. In fact, yesterday, I shared with them, because Barbara has the APOE4 gene, which is, one that's most significant if there is a genetic determinant. And yesterday there was a report that came out that if you don't get dementia at age 70, if you have that gene, your memory is sharper than those that don't have the gene. So
it's an either or. Wow.
It is either or. But well, Peter, obviously we hope that you and your kids, are spared this. It's incredibly frustrating that there has not been more progress on a cure or treatments in the meantime, but it only indicates how complicated, how complex this disease or these syndromes are.
And as I said, it's costing, just in plain dollars, costing our government huge amounts of money. And no, cancer is a concern, of course, and Parkinson's, heart disease, yes. But I think finding a way to either prevent this or avoid it or whatever, treat it, would just save the government and save families, of course, a lot of heartache, but would save the government a lot of money. But I don't know, that's...
Well, David's done a lot of research. I'm sure you have as well. And I think one of our future podcasts is going to address prevention. And I know he's preaching to his daughters lifestyle issues that at least have been shown to have some effect on...
A huge effect. I mean, I'm dreaming diet, exercise, rest, stress management, neural enrichment. I mean, that is just rolling out of my mouth. And I'm convinced that we can substantially reduce and mitigate and avoid dementia in later years by undertaking and committing to these lifestyle changes. I'm convinced of that.
On a similar level, you've heard stories too from clients where mom or dad is kind of a solitary person, don't have any hobbies, activities, memberships, and they pretty much sit at home, and they seem to, maybe they would get the disease anyway, but they seem to accelerate faster.
Right.
Also, there was a couple we had, and we were helping them out, and they had generously agreed to, I think, his mother could live with them, which is wonderful. Okay, they would take care of her and she could be safe. Well, they were both working, so she was safe at home by herself, but she was alone all day.
Right.
And she began to deteriorate. And so they put her in, I think, assisted living facility in Quakertown, and she blossomed. and became kind of the mayor. She was very sociable. So she eventually,
exactly. Yeah, we have an absolute parallel with our mother.
Okay.
Yeah.
She wanted to stay in her house. We knew that that would be a disaster, exactly what you're saying, and that she would flourish in a community. And yeah, there she is now. Billy, she walks in the room. She's the bingo queen.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to eat with her.
They want to touch her hair. Well, you know, it also, that's really part and parcel to the Sharegiving concept, because caregivers suffer so inordinately, suffer, you know, emotional stress. It becomes physical stress, and they suffer dementia to a higher degree than the general public. And it's got to be for that reason that being a caregiver for a dementia sufferer, you become a sufferer.
Yeah, that's just.
I had not known that's fast. Well, unfortunately, fascinating that accelerates it or causes it. We're not sure, but it happens, and somehow linked to just the pressure or the lifestyle or the activities or lack of activities.
Right, and stress. Stress is a huge dynamic in this disease, and it comes at us in so many ways. Aside from just the general stress of worrying and feeling pressure all the time, which many caregivers feel. They're so squeezed, and therefore they eat bad stuff, and they don't sleep well, and they tend to be solitary and don't reach out for help.
And become lonely.
Yeah, and become lonely. So, well, listen, Peter, you've been really generous with your time, and this has been really interesting.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate what you're doing. You know, you're making lemonade out of a lemon. That's not a very good analogy, but you've got that, you're dealing with it, but you're turning it as much, into something positive with caregivers and spreading this knowledge, and anything we can do to help with that. But I've learned a lot just talking to you too. So hopefully it was helpful for your.
I've certainly learned a lot, because I don't know a lot going in. I've been observing a lot, but and I can't help but think about my own family situation, and I'm completely ill prepared for anything. So it's kind of a wake-up call for me. I think the people who come to see you are absolutely fortunate they did. I think you bring so many different qualities to your desk, that you're a legal counselor, you're an emotional counselor, you're a dementia counselor, because of your background, and I think because of the way you've intertwined your background into what you do.
And to that extent, I would say, because Peter, you haven't, we didn't yet, but for those out there that, especially that are domiciled in Pennsylvania, that are looking for assistance, we should give Peter a real shout out that you can call his office at 215-997-9773 and set up an appointment.
With the High Point Law offices.
Right. And I think if you call and ask for a free book, I don't know, Peter, if they're still free, or maybe I got in under the wire.
We still have some in stock. We have to get some more. Yeah.
Good. That's a good sign.
Yeah. Well, it's been very helpful for me too, and I'm glad to see what you're doing, and thank you for taking the time and having me join you in the conversation. Appreciate it very much. And
tune in if you have time to our podcasts.
Yeah.
That are on most podcast platforms, Apple and Google and Spotify. I think you'll find it interesting, and perhaps some of the people you deal with, especially if they're caregivers, could get some comfort and guidance from it.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah. Yeah. We want to give them as much resources as possible. So we'll make sure to do that.
Sure. And we'll certainly give you a heads up as to when this podcast will air.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Thank you both.
Peter, thanks so much.
Enjoy it. Okay. Bye. Be well.
Take care.
Thanks so much for joining us today for Sharegiving. We hope you found Peter Gilbert as interesting as we did, and as always, we invite your comments, questions, advice, any other information you'd like to give us at the website, sharegiversolutions.com. Until next time, remember, sharing is the way of caring, and singing is good for the soul. So, David, let's do it. Amen. 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 Sing it one more time now. Amen. Amen.